The Nevada
You
sun
fight well,
beat down
human.
on the diplomatic
What do you
complex
want?
like a hammer on an anvil,
You
turning
join
the
us.
desert sand into
You fight
glass
well,
that shimmered
human.
with heat
What do
distortion.
you want?
Garrett Sullivan
You
stood at the entrance to
join
the Valorant Embassy section, watching armed guards in obsidian armor flank the doorway. Their scaled skin caught the light in ways human skin never could, deep crimson that looked like polished metal, and their eyes tracked him with the cold assessment of predators evaluating prey. He was early. The wager didn't officially begin for another 3 hours, but Garrett had learned long ago that showing up early to impossible situations gave you time to think, time to breathe, time to remember why you'd volunteered to walk into something that would probably kill you. Behind him, the human section of the complex rose in clean white geometry, all steel and glass, and the architectural optimism of a species that still believed diplomacy could solve anything. Ahead, the Valorant section descended into the earth, carved from red stone that seemed to breathe with ancient violence. Two worlds pressed against each other in the Nevada desert, separated by 50 meters of no man's land and 3 centuries of mutual distrust. Garrett took a breath and started walking. The guards didn't stop him. They'd been expecting him. One touched a communicator at her throat, spoke in harmonics that Garrett's translator couldn't quite parse, and the massive doors ground open with the sound of stone on stone. Cool air rushed out, carrying the scent of something mineral and sharp like blood on hot metal. Inside, the architecture shifted. Human buildings rose toward light. Valorant buildings descended toward darkness, driven by some cultural instinct that equated depth with power. Garrett followed the guards down 3 levels of corridors that grew progressively narrower, the walls transitioning from polished stone to raw rock that looked like it had been clawed out by hand. They brought him to an amphitheater that stretched beneath a vaulted ceiling, studded with bioluminescent crystals, casting everything in purple light that made human skin look bruised and Valorant skin look like fresh wounds. Tiered seating rose on all sides, already half filled with Valorant elite, in formal robes that seemed designed to emphasize the additional arms, the elongated torsos, the fundamental wrongness of their biology from a human perspective. Archon Thesia stood at the center platform. She wore white robes tailored to accommodate 4 arms instead of 2, and tribal markings ran down her face in patterns that might have been beautiful if Garrett could separate them from the context of what she represented. Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd never been told no in her life. "The human arrives," she announced, her tone suggesting she'd just received a laboratory specimen for examination. 3 hours early, eager to die or simply ignorant of proper protocol. Garrett executed the bow he'd been taught by the cultural attaché, not submissive but respectful. A ripple of amusement moved through the crowd like wind across water. "Honored Archon," he said, keeping his voice level, neither eager nor ignorant, simply prepared. Thesia descended the steps toward him with the fluid grace of something that had evolved for a higher gravity than Earth. Up close, she towered over him by nearly a foot, and the way she moved suggested she could close the distance between them and break his neck before his nervous system could process the threat. "Prepared," she repeated, tasting the word like it was foreign. "Ambassador Sullivan, you've been briefed on the nature of tonight's arrangement." "I have." "Then you understand that First Warrior Kira Velthron has served the Valorant military with distinction for 13 years. 315 confirmed eliminations. Perfect operational record. She is our finest instrument of enforcement, and tonight she will be placed in confined quarters with you for 12 hours. Her only instruction is that she may do with you as she wishes." Garrett felt something cold settle in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "And the wager?" Thesia smiled, showing teeth that seemed too numerous for her mouth. "Simple mathematics, Ambassador. The medical assessment gives you a 14% chance of surviving the night intact. Physical survival, that is. Psychological survival rates considerably lower. The court has wagered that you will not last until dawn. If by some miracle You Earth receives exclusive trade rights to 7 Valorant colony systems, if you don't," she spread her 4 arms in a gesture that might have been a shrug, "well, 1 diplomat is a small price for Earth to pay for attempting to negotiate above its station." "And Kira," Garrett asked, "what does she get out of this arrangement?" The smile widened. "First Warrior Velthron gets to do what she was born to do. What could be more generous than that?" Something in the way Thesia said it made Garrett's instincts scream. This wasn't just about humiliating Earth. This was about something else, something buried beneath the political theater. But he'd volunteered for this knowing the odds, knowing that sometimes the only way to crack a culture's armor was to let them think they'd already won. I accept the terms, Garrett said. Of course you do, Thessia replied. You don't have a choice. They took him deeper. The corridors became tunnels that felt older than the complex itself, carved into bedrock that predated human civilization on this continent. The temperature dropped with each level until Garrett could see his breath, and the walls showed scorch marks that suggested this section had seen violence the official records never mentioned. The holding cell was approximately 12 by 15 meters. A platform bed with restraints bolted at the corners dominated one wall. Medical monitoring equipment lined another, the kind designed to record everything that happened to a human body under extreme duress. No weapons, no escape routes. Cameras positioned so thoroughly that privacy was a comfortable fiction people told themselves before entering rooms like this. Garrett moved to the small observation window and looked out at the Nevada landscape beyond. Rust-colored dunes stretched toward a horizon where the setting sun painted the sky in shades of blood and brass. This world had shaped her, he thought. This world and the culture that had refined violence into an art form, that had taken strength and dominance and built an entire civilization on the principle that the strong consume the weak. He thought about the file he'd read during the transport from Geneva. Kira Velthron taken into the Genesis program at age 13. Genetic markers optimal for aggression, for physical capability, for the kind of neural architecture that made hesitation impossible. They'd engineered her, refined her, perfected her into an instrument of violence that had never failed in 13 years. The evaluation report had included one note that stuck with him. Subject demonstrates unusual resistance to behavioral modification in later conditioning phases. Recommend increased neurochemical intervention to suppress autonomous decision-making protocols. They'd broken her so completely, they had to keep breaking her to maintain the illusion she was still functional. Garrett removed his jacket and sat on the edge of the platform. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He'd expected fear to make them shake, but instead there was only a strange calm, the kind that came from accepting that you had reached a point where survival wasn't guaranteed, and the only thing you could control was how you faced whatever came next. 2 hours passed in silence. The sun set beyond the window, plunging the desert into darkness, broken only by the 3 moons rising in sequence across the Valoran sky. Garrett had read that the triple moonrise held religious significance for them, some ancient belief about the intersection of fate and choice in the moment when the universe revealed its true intentions. When the door hissed open, she filled the frame. Kira was taller than the medical files suggested, her body a study in predatory efficiency that made every movement seem calculated for maximum lethal potential. Violet hair cascaded past her shoulders in waves that caught the purple light from the bioluminescent strips along the ceiling, slightly disheveled in a way that suggested she'd come directly from something physical. Her skin was deep crimson that seemed to drink the light rather than reflect it, and dark markings ran down her face and arms like scars that had been branded into her genetics. Black armor plated across her form in configurations designed for close combat, and her hands were already curling into shapes that suggested she was calculating efficiency angles. Her eyes were the thing that made Garrett's breath catch. They held no mercy, no recognition of humanity's worth, no hesitation before violence. They held only assessment in the absolute certainty that she would do precisely what she'd been designed to do. She moved into the room with the fluid grace of something that had killed hundreds and would kill hundreds more. The door sealed behind her with a finality that sounded like a coffin closing. "I was told to hurt you," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that suggested she was producing sound from more than just her throat. Something deeper, more resonant, like her entire chest cavity, served as an instrument. "The court wants to know if you will break." Garrett stood slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and unthreatening. "And what do you want?" Kira's head tilted fractionally, an expression flickering across her face too quickly to read. It might have been confusion. It might have been anger. Then she moved, closing the distance between them with lethal speed that turned the air between them into a weapon, and Garrett's entire body went cold because he finally understood what the real problem was. She wouldn't break him deliberately. The court had made a fundamental miscalculation. Kira wasn't going to hurt him because she'd been told to hurt him. She was going to hurt him because that's what she did. And this time there was no external mission structure to channel it, Just him alone in a room with a woman who'd been engineered to be exactly as dangerous as she was beautiful. She grabbed his throat. Her hand closed around his neck with enough force to guarantee damage, the grip of someone who understood exactly how much pressure it took to collapse a trachea and had calibrated her strength to stay just below that threshold. Garrett felt his airway compress, felt the strength in those red fingers that could crush bone if she applied slightly more pressure. His vision started to tunnel black, creeping in from the edges, and every survival instinct in his body screamed at him to fight back, to claw at her arm, to do something other than stand there and let her kill him. He didn't. Instead, he locked eyes with her and forced his body to stay vertical, forced his breathing to shallow, and waited. It took perhaps 4 seconds before she registered that he wasn't resisting, wasn't clawing at her arm, wasn't doing any of the things her victims presumably did. Her grip loosened marginally. "You're not fighting," Kira said, something in her voice shifting toward a question. That question shouldn't exist in that voice. "No," Garrett rasped. "I'm not." She released him and he dropped to one knee, pulling air back into his lungs in ragged gasps. The black spots receded slowly. His throat already felt raw, would probably show the full imprint of her hand tomorrow if there was a tomorrow. She stood over him, her head tilted in that same fractional angle, and he could see her processing, trying to understand why the prey was behaving like something other than prey. "You should be afraid," she said. Garrett looked up at her, at the waves of her hair catching the room's dim light, at the tribal markings that made her face look like it had been carved from a violence-obsessed god's fever dream. And he smiled. It was probably insane. It was definitely necessary. "I am," he said, his voice rough, "but fear isn't why I'm here." "Why are you here?" Her question was basic, almost clinical, as if she was asking him to explain something that existed outside her comprehension. Garrett pushed himself back to standing, his throat burning with each breath. "To survive. To prove that humans can do something Valorant culture probably can't imagine." What adapt change? The words came out with an edge of something that might have been curiosity beneath the warrior's assessment. "Choose," Garrett said. "Really choose. Not the illusion of choice between different violent options. Real choice. To hurt me or not hurt me. To trust me or not trust me. To be exactly what they made you to be, or to be something entirely different." Kira's ears pointed and forward-facing when she was focused flattened slightly. She moved past him with a predator's grace and settled onto the floor of the quarters rather than the bed. It was a casual gesture, devastatingly dismissive. She could kill him whenever she chose. They both understood that. She was simply choosing not to right now. "The court records indicate you're a diplomat," she said, not looking at him, "that you specialize in cultural mediation. Why would the Federation send someone like you to certain death?" Garrett sat back down on the edge of the platform, maintaining distance but not running. "Because nothing they sent me to do was more important than this. Then what, proving they were wrong about humans, about what you're capable of. Yes, and maybe proving they were wrong about you too." Kira's head turned toward him, her eyes holding depths that seemed designed to cut through anything they touched. In the bioluminescent glow from the corridor beyond the transparent section of wall, he could see the precise musculature of her shoulders, the raw power in the way she held herself. This was a woman engineered for dominance, and she'd never encountered a single thing that wouldn't eventually break beneath her. "The court believes they're always right," she said. "They engineered me to believe the same thing. You're going to be the first evidence against that assumption." How? By refusing to bow, by not breaking, by showing them that whatever they think they know about human limitations, they're wrong. "Something like that," Garrett said. "You're supposed to be my destruction. But what if instead you're my survival? What if the whole premise is backwards?" She stood abruptly, moving to the observation window and looking out at the rust-colored landscape beyond. Garrett could see the way her breathing changed, slightly deeper, slightly faster, as if his words had triggered some physiological response she didn't have a framework to understand. "You speak as if we're allies," Kira said to the window. "Maybe we should be," Garrett replied. "Maybe that's why the court made this bet. They assumed you'd hurt me because that's what you've been taught to do. They assumed I'd break because that's what they think humans do. Neither of those assumptions has to be true." She turned back to face him, and in that moment, he saw something shift behind her eyes. Not weakness, not surrender, but the beginning of a possibility. A small crack in the architectural certainty that had been built into her since childhood. If I don't hurt you, Kira said slowly, the court will be disappointed. Will they kill you for that? Potentially. Then we have even more in common than I thought, Garrett said. We're both walking towards something they want dead. Kira moved back to the platform where he was sitting. She didn't strike, didn't grab, didn't do any of the 100 violent things Garrett expected. Instead, she sat beside him close enough that he could feel the heat radiating off her skin and stared at the wall in front of them. They sat in silence for 3 hours. When the medical technician arrived to document his condition before they separated for what the court assumed would be the final evaluation before his death, Garrett had a perfect handprint bruise around his throat and nothing else. No broken bones, no lacerations, no signs of the systematic torture they'd been expecting. The technician, a Valoran male with the bearing of someone who'd seen too many bodies, examined Garrett with professional detachment. Subject shows initial damage consistent with warrior engagement, injuries minor, prognosis unchanged. After he left, Kira stood and moved toward the door. She paused with her hand on the release mechanism, not looking back. Tomorrow night, she said, they'll expect more damage. They'll expect progression toward your breaking point. What will they get? Garrett asked. I don't know yet, Kira said, and something in her voice suggested that for the first time in 13 years, she was genuinely uncertain about what she would choose to do. The door opened. She left. And Garrett sat alone in the holding cell, his throat raw and his ribs aching from where he'd held his body rigid during those 4 seconds of strangulation, and thought about the way she'd looked when she'd asked him why he wasn't fighting, like someone discovering that questions existed. The next 6 nights established a pattern that felt like choreography for something neither of them had the vocabulary to name. Kira arrived each evening at the same hour, and each evening she tested different approaches. Pressure point attacks that would have immobilized a normal human. Strikes designed to break bones but calibrated to stop just short of fracture. Tactics obviously pulled from her combat training, applied with the precision of someone conducting an experiment rather than an execution. Each night, Garrett didn't retaliate, didn't escalate, didn't provide the violent mirror she'd been designed to expect from everything she encountered. On the 3rd night, she asked him about Earth. Not the political structures or the military capabilities, but the small things. What rain felt like on human skin. Whether humans dreamed. If there was a human equivalent to the Valoran concept of Kreshta, which her translator rendered inadequately as the moment when honor and necessity diverge. Garrett told her about thunderstorms in the Pacific Northwest, about the way Seattle rain fell so fine it seemed like the air itself was crying. He told her that humans dream constantly, that whole careers existed, studying the architecture of sleep in the strange countries the mind visited when consciousness surrendered to exhaustion. And he told her that humans called that divergence a moral dilemma, and that whole branches of philosophy existed trying to navigate the space between what was right and what was necessary. She listened with an intensity that suggested she was cataloging everything, building some internal database of information that had nothing to do with combat efficiency or strategic advantage. On the 5th night, she asked him why he'd volunteered. They were sitting on the floor of the holding cell, backs against the opposite walls, the distance between them exactly 3 meters. Far enough that she couldn't reach him before he could react. Close enough that conversation didn't require raised voices. The medical monitors hummed in the background, recording everything, and somewhere in the complex above them, the Valoran court was watching the footage and trying to understand why their perfect weapon hadn't destroyed the fragile human yet. The Federation offered the assignment to 12 different diplomats, Garrett said. All of them declined. The actuarial analysis gave me a 14% chance of survival. Most of my colleagues considered that optimistic. That doesn't answer the question, Kira said. Why did you accept? Garrett was quiet for a moment, trying to find words for something he wasn't sure he understood himself. Because I've spent my entire career trying to build bridges between species that don't trust each other. And I've learned that sometimes the only way to prove trust is possible is to offer it first, even when offering it might kill you. Especially when offering it might kill you. That's not logical. No, Garrett agreed, it's not. But logic doesn't change hearts, Kira, and I think your heart is what they're most afraid of. She stood abruptly, moving to the observation window with her arms crossed over her chest. Her ears flicked back twice in succession, a gesture he'd learned meant she was processing something that conflicted with her existing framework. I don't have a heart, she said to the darkness beyond the glass. I have a cardiovascular system optimized for sustained combat capability. I have neurochemical regulators that suppress emotional response and enhance threat assessment. I have everything I need to be exactly what the court designed me to be. And yet you're talking to me instead of breaking me, Garrett said quietly. What does that tell you? Kira turned back to face him, and in the purple light from the bioluminescent strips, her eyes looked almost human, almost vulnerable. Almost like someone who was terrified of discovering that everything she'd been told about herself was a carefully constructed lie. It tells me, she said slowly, that something is malfunctioning. On the seventh night, everything changed. Kira entered the holding cell, and immediately Garrett knew something was wrong. Her movements were too tight, too controlled, like someone holding themselves together against internal pressure. Her hair was pulled back in a severe braid that emphasized the aggressive geometry of her skull, and her eyes held a burning intensity that appeared when she'd been in extended physical exertion or pain. She moved to the center of the room and stood there, hands clenched into fists at her sides. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then blood started dripping from her nose, vivid crimson against her darker skin, and her entire body shuddered with something that looked like a seizure barely suppressed. Kira, Garrett said, standing slowly. What's happening? Stay back, she said, her voice carrying harmonics that sounded wrong, discordant like her throat was producing frequencies that didn't belong in the same spectrum. Don't come near me. He froze. Talk to me. What's wrong? The implant, she said, and the words came out between clenched teeth. It's glitching. Has been for 3 months. Getting worse. Tonight it's fighting me because I'm not hurting you. It's designed to trigger aggression response when confronted with targets designated for elimination. You're designated. I'm resisting. It's trying to force compliance. Another shudder ran through her body, stronger this time. More blood dripped from her nose, and when she looked up at him, there was something feral in her eyes, something that suggested the engineered violence was winning against whatever fragile choice she'd been cultivating. You need medical attention, Garrett said. I need you to leave, Kira said. Now, before I can't control this anymore. The door's locked from the outside, we both know that. Then get against the far wall and don't move. Garrett didn't move toward the wall. Instead, he took one step closer to her. Kira, listen to me. You've been fighting this for 7 nights. You've been choosing not to hurt me for 7 nights. Whatever they put in your head, it's not stronger than you. You don't understand, she said, and her voice was breaking now, the harmonics fracturing into something that sounded almost like desperation. I've killed 315 beings. Most of them didn't want to die. All of them tried to resist. I killed them anyway because that's what the implant makes me do. It makes resistance impossible. And yet you are resisting right now. I'm failing right now, she said. In approximately 30 seconds, the neurochemical cascade will override my conscious control, and I will attack you with lethal intent. And this time, I won't be able to stop. Garrett took another step closer. Then we have 30 seconds to find another option. There is no other option. This is what I am. This is what they made me. No, Garrett said, and he took the final steps that brought him within arm's reach of her, close enough that she could kill him with a single movement. This is what they tried to make you. You are what you choose to be, and right now you're choosing to warn me. You're choosing to fight the implant instead of fighting me. That choice matters, Kira. It matters more than anything they engineered into you. Her hand shot out and grabbed his shirt, pulling him close with enough force that he heard fabric tear. Her face was inches from his, and he could see the way her pupils were dilating and contracting in rapid sequence. Could see the blood vessels in her eyes starting to burst. Could see every sign of a biological system at war with itself. I could kill you, she whispered. Yes, Garrett said. You could, but you won't. How do you know? Because you're still talking. Because if the implant had won, you wouldn't be warning me. You'd just be executing. For a long moment, they stayed like that, her hand fisted in his shirt close enough that he could feel her breath on his face, hot and ragged, and carrying the scent of something metallic. Then her hand opened and she pushed him away, stumbling backward until she hit the wall and slid down to the floor. The seizure that took her was violent enough that Garrett thought she was dying. Her body convulsed, muscles contracting in patterns that looked like combat movements executed at random, and blood streamed from her nose and ears in quantities that suggested serious internal damage. He moved toward her, but she held up one hand, stopping on him. "Don't," she gasped. "It's trying to make me attack anything that comes close. Just stay back." Garrett stayed back and watched, and counted the seconds while Kira fought a war against her own neurology, her body thrashing against the floor while her hands clawed at her own head, as if she could physically rip out whatever was causing this. It lasted 4 minutes and 37 seconds. Garrett counted. When it finally stopped, Kira lay on the floor in a spreading pool of her own blood, breathing in shallow gasps that sounded like someone who'd just run a marathon while drowning. "I need you to listen very carefully," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What just happened? That's been happening more frequently. 3 months ago, once a month. 2 months ago, once a week. Last month, every 3 days. As of tonight, it's happening daily." "What is it?" Garrett asked. "Implant rejection," Kira said. "The Genesis program implants neurochemical regulators when we're 13 during peak neuroplasticity. They're designed to integrate with our natural biology, enhance aggression, response, suppress empathy, circuits, optimize us for combat. But they're also designed with planned obsolescence. Warriors who survive past age 30 start experiencing rejection. The implant begins to malfunction. We become unstable, dangerous in ways the court can't control." "How old are you?" 26 Valorant years, she said, which translates to approximately 180 of your years. "I have 4 months, maybe less, before the rejection becomes total. At that point, I'll either experience catastrophic brain death or enter a permanent berserker state where I attack anything that moves." She pushed herself into a sitting position, leaning against the wall, her face a mask of blood and exhaustion. "The court knows. They've known for 3 months. This wager isn't about testing you, Garrett. It's about giving them justification to retire me. They were hoping I'd kill you in the first night, prove that I've become too unstable for operational deployment, give them grounds to decommission me honorably before anyone asks why. And instead, you've been choosing not to kill me for 7 nights, Garrett said, which proves you're still in control." "It proves I'm barely in control," Kira said. "Tonight I almost killed you. The only reason I didn't is because you talked me down, and even that barely worked. Next time it might not work at all. Then we need to find out why the implant is rejecting," Garrett said, "and whether there's a way to stop it." Kira laughed, but it was a broken sound, empty of humor. "You think the court doesn't know they designed the rejection? It's not a malfunction, Garrett. It's a feature. Warriors who live long enough to accumulate combat experience also live long enough to start questioning orders, to develop autonomous decision-making capability, to become threats instead of tools. Planned obsolescence solves that problem. We die before we can become dangerous to them." "How many warriors have been retired?" "In the last decade, 40, all between the ages of 25 and 30, all officially retired due to various medical complications, all actually executed before the rejection symptoms became public." "How do you know that?" "Because I have combat clearance to medical archives," Kira said. "And because for the last 3 months while this has been happening to me, I've been looking for others like me. And I found them. 40 files. 40 warriors who died with the same symptoms I'm experiencing. 40 murders disguised as honorable retirements." She looked up at him with eyes that held something beyond pain or anger. Something that looked like dawning horror at the full scope of what had been done to her. "I'm not malfunctioning," she said. "I'm performing exactly as designed. I'm dying on schedule. And the court is betting that you'll die with me, which will let them kill 2 problems with 1 justification." Garrett was quiet for a long moment, processing the full weight of what she was telling him. Then he moved across the room and sat down beside her against the wall, close enough that their shoulders were almost touching. "Then we change the parameters," he said. "We make the wager about something else." "What else is there?" "Proof," Garrett said. "You just told me there are 40 dead warriors with the same symptoms. That's not individual malfunction. That's systemic murder. If we can prove that if we can document the planned obsolescence, we can force the court to answer questions they've been avoiding. We can make this about more than just you and me. They'll never let us investigate, Kira said. The moment I start making noise about this, they'll accelerate my retirement. Then we don't investigate quietly, Garrett said. We make it public. We demand answers in a forum where they can't silence us without exposing themselves. What forum? The Valoran court is absolute. There's no higher authority. There's tradition, Garrett said. I've read your cultural files. Valoran society has ancient laws about warriors' rights, about honor challenges, about mechanisms warriors can invoke when they believe they've been wronged by command structure. Trial by combat, public challenge, the old codes that predate the Genesis program. Kira's head turned toward him, and he could see her processing running through cultural frameworks that had been buried beneath 13 years of conditioning, but were still there encoded in the same genetic heritage the court had tried to override. Trial by combat, she said slowly. If I invoke ancient law, challenge the court's decision to retire me, demand public trial, they'd have to acknowledge it. Traditional law is binding even for the Archon. And in a public trial, questions get asked. Evidence gets presented. 40 dead warriors becomes part of the official record. It's also incredibly dangerous, Kira said. Trial by combat means I fight the court's champion. If I lose, I die. If I win, I get to ask questions publicly, but there's no guarantee the court answers truthfully. But it's a chance, Garrett said, which is more than you have right now. Kira was quiet, staring at the blood pooling on the floor around them. When she finally spoke, her voice carried something it hadn't before. Not hope exactly, but the absence of absolute certainty about her own death. If I do this, she said, everything changes. I stop being a warrior following orders and become a warrior challenging authority. They'll send their best to kill me. Someone younger, faster, without implant rejection. Someone who hasn't spent 7 nights learning to question. Who would they send? Garrett asked. Vera Cross, Kira said immediately. Generation 4 enhancement. 24 years old. Aggression index 47% higher than mine. 0 operational failures. She's everything I was before the rejection started. Everything I would have stayed if I hadn't met you. And you think you can beat her? No, Kira said. In a straight fight, she'd kill me in under 3 minutes. But trial by combat isn't just about fighting. It's about honor, about proving your case has merit. If I can make Vera question even for a moment, even for 1 second, that might be enough. She pushed herself to standing, swaying slightly, and Garrett stood with her. The medical monitors were screaming warnings now, recording the seizure, the blood loss, the physiological trauma that suggested their subject was experiencing catastrophic system failure. Tomorrow they'll see this data, Kira said. They'll know the rejection is accelerating. They'll try to retire me quietly before I can invoke trial rights. Then we invoke them tonight, Garrett said, right now, before they can move against you. Kira looked at him for a long moment, this human who had walked into certain death and somehow survived 7 nights by refusing to be what she expected, by offering her something she didn't have the framework to accept until he showed her it had existed. Choice. She moved to the door and slammed her fist against the communication panel. I invoke my rights as first warrior to address the court on matters of honor and tradition. I demand immediate audience with Archon Thessia under the protocols of Reshmatok. The ancient words spoken in the old tongue that predated modern Valoran carried weight that even the Genesis program couldn't completely erase. There was a long silence. Then the door opened and 6 guards stood in the corridor, weapons drawn. First Warrior Velthron, the lead guard, said, "You are ordered to submit to medical evaluation for suspected operational compromise." "I submit to nothing," Kira said, and her voice carried the full harmonic resonance of someone invoking ancient law. "I claim Reshmatok, trial by combat, public challenge, the old rights that bind all Valorans regardless of rank or augmentation. Take me to the Archon now, or admit before these witnesses that the court fears tradition more than it honors it." The guards looked at each other, ancient law versus modern authority. They were warriors bred and trained for violence, but they were also Valorans whose entire culture was built on the bedrock of warrior tradition. To refuse a legitimate invocation of Reshmatok would make them oath breakers. The lead guard touched his communicator, spoke quietly, listened, then nodded. "The Archon will see you," he said. "Both of you." The amphitheater looked different at midnight. The bioluminescent crystals had dimmed to a cold blue that made the assembled Valoran elite look like corpses arranged in tiered judgment. Archon Thesia sat at the center platform, her forearms folded in a configuration that suggested barely restrained fury. Around her, the court had assembled with remarkable speed, roused from whatever activities occupied Valoran aristocracy in the small hours, and dragged here to witness something that hadn't happened in 3 generations. A warrior invoking Reshmatok, the old challenge, the ancient rite. Kira stood at the center of the arena floor, blood still crusted on her face from the seizure, her armor scuffed, and her breathing labored. Garrett stood 3 paces behind her, positioned as witness rather than participant. The guards had insisted he be present, though whether that was tradition or theater he couldn't determine. First warrior Belthron. Thesia said, her voice carrying the dangerous softness of someone who'd decided exactly how this would end and was simply waiting for the formalities to conclude. "You invoke rights that have not been claimed in living memory. Reshmatok requires grounds, serious grounds. A warrior does not challenge the court's judgment lightly. I challenge on grounds of systemic deception." Kira said, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled at her sides. "I challenge on grounds of murder disguised as medical retirement. I challenge on grounds that the Genesis program has been killing warriors at age 30 to prevent them from accumulating enough experience to question their conditioning." A ripple moved through the assembled court like wind across water. Murmurs in the old tongue, harmonic patterns of shock and denial, and something that might have been recognition. Thesia raised one hand and silence fell immediately. "Those are extraordinary accusations, First Warrior. Do you have evidence?" 40 dead warriors in 10 years, Kira said, all between ages 25 and 30, all with identical medical complications that the court classified as natural implant degradation. All retired quietly before their symptoms became public knowledge. I have their names, I have their medical files, and I have the Genesis program's internal documentation showing that implant rejection at age 30 is not a malfunction, but a designed feature. She pulled a data chip from her armor and held it up. The small crystal caught the blue light and seemed to glow with its own cold fire. "This contains everything," Kira said. "Personnel records, medical assessments, engineering specifications showing the planned obsolescence protocols, communication logs between Genesis administrators discussing retirement schedules for warriors approaching the age threshold. I accessed these files using my combat clearance 3 days ago. I've been carrying them since, waiting for the right moment to make them public." Thesia's expression didn't change, but something shifted in the quality of her stillness. "Where did you obtain Genesis program documentation? Those files are classified above even your clearance level." "I obtained them," Kira said, "by breaking approximately 47 security protocols, committing 12 acts of electronic intrusion, and violating my operational mandate in ways that would justify immediate decommissioning under normal circumstances. But these aren't normal circumstances, and I invoke Reshmatok specifically because I knew the court would try to silence me the moment I started asking questions. Ancient law protects me until trial concludes. You taught me that, Archon. You taught all of us that tradition is the bedrock of valor and strength. Now prove it." For a long moment, no one spoke. The amphitheater held its breath, waiting to see whether the Archon would honor tradition or admit that 3 centuries of Genesis conditioning had finally eroded the cultural foundations that made Valoran civilization something more than organized violence. Thesia stood slowly descending the tiered steps with deliberate grace. When she reached the arena floor, she circled Kira like a predator, evaluating prey. Her forearms moving in subtle gestures that suggested she was performing calculations that had nothing to do with combat. "You understand," Thesia said quietly, "that Reshmatok requires you to face trial by combat. If you lose, these accusations die with you. The data chip becomes court property. Everything you've discovered becomes classified at the highest level. No one will ever know." "I understand," Kira said. "And you understand that I will choose the court's champion based on combat capability, not fairness. I will send someone designed to kill you efficiently." "I understand that too." Then you are either incredibly brave or catastrophically damaged by implant rejection, Thesia said. Either way, the result will be the same. You will die in this arena, and Earth's diplomat will watch, and the court will continue exactly as it has for 3 centuries. She turned to face the assembled elite, raising her voice to carry through the amphitheater. First warrior Kira Velthron has invoked Reshma Talk under accusations of systemic deception and unlawful termination of combat personnel. As Archon, I acknowledge her right under ancient law. Trial by combat will commence in 7 days, giving both parties time to prepare. The court's champion will be announced in 3 days. Until trial concludes, First Warrior Velthron operates under protection of traditional law and may not be detained, sedated, or retired by medical authority. She paused, letting the weight of those words settle. However, she will be confined to quarters with minimal contact to prevent further security breaches. The human diplomat will be released from the wager arrangement as current circumstances have invalidated the original terms. No, Kira said. Thesia turned back to her, and something dangerous flickered across her face. No. The wager continues, Kira said. Garrett Sullivan remains with me during preparation. He's the only being in this complex who has no investment in maintaining Genesis program deceptions. I want him present as witness to ensure I'm not quietly compromised before trial. That's highly irregular. So is a first warrior invoking Reshma Talk, Kira replied. We're past regular Archon. We're into territory where tradition is the only law that matters. And tradition says a warrior preparing for trial by combat may choose their own support structure. I choose him. Garrett felt every eye in the amphitheater turn toward him. He kept his expression neutral, though his heart was hammering against his ribs hard enough that he thought the medical monitors must be screaming warnings. Thesia studied him with an intensity that suggested she was trying to determine exactly how this fragile human had managed to survive 7 nights with a warrior experiencing catastrophic implant rejection, and whether his survival represented a variable she'd failed to account for in her calculations. Very well, she said finally, the human stays. But understand, Ambassador Sullivan, that you are now complicit in whatever outcome occurs. If First Warrior Velthron dies in trial, you bear witness to the validity of that death. Earth cannot later claim foul play or challenge the court's judgment. I understand, Garrett said, finding his voice, and I accept those terms. Thesia nodded once, a gesture of dismissal that carried absolute finality. 7 days. Use them wisely, First Warrior. They're the last you have. They took Kira and Garrett to new quarters 3 levels above the holding cells, but still deep enough in the Valoran section that natural light felt like a distant memory. 2 rooms connected by a common area, surveillance reduced but not eliminated, and guards posted at the single entrance, with instructions to prevent exit but allow medical access if Kira's condition deteriorated, which based on the seizure patterns seemed inevitable. The first night in the new quarters, Kira collapsed twice. The seizures were getting worse, lasting longer, requiring more conscious effort to suppress the implant's kill commands. Garrett watched helplessly as she fought her own neurology, her body convulsing while her hands clawed at invisible threats, and understood with terrible clarity that even if she survived to reach the trial, she might not survive the trial itself. On the second day, she asked him to help her access Earth medical databases. Valoran medicine approaches implant rejection as a terminal condition. She explained, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the common area with data displays projected around her in holographic arrays. They've never tried to reverse it because reversal would require admitting the implants were designed to fail. But human neuroscience has been studying implant technology for 2 centuries. Different context, different purpose, but maybe similar principles. Garrett used his diplomatic credentials to open channels to Geneva Medical Research Center, carefully routing the request through systems that wouldn't immediately trigger Valoran security alerts. Within 6 hours, they had access to 300 years of human research on neural implants, cybernetic integration, and the unique challenges of merging biological systems with engineered technology. They searched through hundreds of papers, abstracts, case studies. Most were irrelevant, dealing with peripheral nervous system enhancements or sensory augmentation that had nothing to do with the deep brain integration of Genesis implants. But Garrett kept looking, driven by the desperate hope that somewhere in humanity's accumulated medical knowledge was an answer that Valoran science had deliberately avoided finding. On the 3rd day, Thesia announced the court's champion. Vera Cross, Generation 4, 24 Valoran years, approximately 170 human years. Aggression Index 940 compared to Kira's 847. 362 confirmed eliminations in 6 years of service, including 17 in direct combat against targets who'd been considered the finest warriors of their respective species. Perfect operational record. Zero failures, zero hesitation, zero evidence of anything resembling autonomous thought. The announcement came with holographic footage of Vera's most recent operation, a hostage extraction on a mining colony, where she'd neutralized 47 armed combatants in 17 minutes without sustaining injury. The footage showed her moving through the facility like water flowing downhill, each movement economical and lethal, each decision executed with the kind of precision that suggested she didn't experience doubt or fear or any emotion that might slow the gap between target identification and target elimination. Watching the footage, Garrett understood exactly how outmatched Kira was. Vera wasn't just younger and faster. She was everything Kira had been before the rejection started, everything the Genesis program had perfected in the years since Kira's generation. She was the weapon Kira used to be, encountering the warrior Kira was becoming, and the outcome seemed mathematically inevitable. She's beautiful, Kira said quietly, watching Vera dispatch 3 opponents simultaneously with movements that looked like choreographed dance. Look at the efficiency, the absolute certainty. I remember feeling like that. Like the universe existed in simple categories of threat and non-threat, target and bystander mission and irrelevance. Everything clean, everything clear. You don't feel that way anymore, Garrett said. No, Kira agreed. Now everything is complicated. Now I see 47 people dying, and I wonder if they had families, if they'd been given choices, if maybe there was another way to resolve the situation that didn't require killing everyone in the facility. Those thoughts make me weaker, Garrett. They make me slower. They make me exactly the kind of liability the Genesis program is designed to eliminate. Or they make you human, Garrett said. Kira turned to look at him, and something in her expression suggested she was trying to determine whether being human was worth dying for. The 4th and 5th days were dedicated to preparation that had nothing to do with combat training. Kira couldn't sustain physical exertion for more than 10 minutes before risking seizure, so instead they focused on strategy. Garrett pulled every file he could access on Vera's operational history, analyzing her patterns, her decision matrices, the subtle tells that revealed how Generation 4 conditioning differed from earlier iterations. She's predictable, Garrett said, spreading tactical displays across the common area floor. Not in the obvious ways, but in how she responds to specific stimuli. Look at this encounter. Target feints left, Vera counters right, because her training prioritizes protecting her weapon hand. Here opponent goes high, she drops low because Generation 4 enhancement optimizes for ground-based grappling. Every response is perfect for standard combat scenarios. But not for psychological warfare, Kira said, seeing where he was going. If I can make her question the mission parameters even for a second, her conditioning doesn't have protocols for that. Exactly. You don't beat her by being stronger or faster. You beat her by being something her training never prepared her to encounter. Late on the 5th night, while Kira was sleeping fitfully in her quarters, Garrett found it. Buried in the medical archives at the bottom of a subsection on historical implant failures, a paper from 2156, written by a research team studying treatment for soldiers who'd received combat enhancement implants during the African Federation conflicts. The implants had been designed to boost reaction time and suppress fear response, but 10% of recipients experienced catastrophic rejection within 5 years. The paper documented a treatment protocol that had achieved 60% success rates, though the procedure itself was described in terms that made Garrett's stomach turn. The key wasn't removal. The implants had integrated too deeply for extraction without causing fatal brain damage. Instead, the treatment involved conscious resistance during a specialized procedure that essentially taught the patient's brain to rewire around the implant rather than trying to incorporate it or reject it. 8 hours of surgery. 8 hours where the patient had to remain conscious and actively fight the implant's influence, while medical personnel performed delicate neural pathway reconstruction. The paper included testimony from survivors describing it as the most agonizing experience of their lives, requiring sustained mental effort that felt like holding your breath for hours while someone carved your brain open. But 60% survived. And of those, 95% achieved full recovery with the implant isolated and rendered non-functional. Garrett read the paper 3 times, checking the methodology, the success rates, the specific techniques. Then he pulled up comparative neurology files mapping human brain structures against Valorant equivalents. The basic architecture was similar enough that the procedure might work, though the deeper integration of Genesis implants meant the risks would be substantially higher. He was still reading when Kira emerged from her quarters, drawn by the light from his data displays. "What did you find?" she asked. Garrett showed it her, explained the procedure, the risks, the success rates, qualified with warnings that Valorant neurology might respond differently. Kira absorbed it all with the focused intensity of someone calculating survival odds, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. 60%, she said finally, for humans with peripheral implants. What do you think my odds are with deep brain integration and active rejection? Honestly, Garrett said, maybe 40%, maybe less. Still better than zero, Kira replied. Still better than dying in the arena or waiting for the rejection to kill me. But this is irrelevant unless I survive the trial, and we both know that's unlikely. Then we make surviving the trial more likely, Garrett said. We find a way to reach Vera, to make her question long enough that you get an opening. On the 6th day, Kira had her worst seizure yet. It hit during what should have been a simple review session, her body convulsing so violently that she cracked her head against the floor hard enough to draw blood. Garrett called for medical assistance, but the guards refused to let anyone enter without Archon Thessia's authorization, and Thessia was conveniently unavailable. So Garrett did the only thing he could. He sat beside Kira and talked to her through it, his voice steady and calm, describing everything he could remember about Earth. The Pacific Ocean, the Rocky Mountains, thunderstorms in Nebraska. His grandmother's garden in Virginia, where tomatoes grew so heavy they bent the vines to the ground. Anything to give her something to focus on that wasn't the implant screaming at her to attack, to kill, to execute the prime directive that had been burned into her neurology 13 years ago. The seizure lasted 11 minutes. When it finally released her, Kira lay on the floor gasping like someone who'd drowned and been dragged back to shore, blood pooling beneath her head from where she'd split her scalp. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow is trial. I don't know if I'll make it through the night." "You'll make it," Garrett said, though he had no evidence to support that statement beyond sheer desperate hope. "You've made it this far. This far isn't far enough." She pushed herself to sitting, leaning against the wall, and Garrett could see the exhaustion in every line of her body. This was what Genesis obsolescence looked like in its final stages. Not the clean efficiency of a weapon being retired, but the slow, brutal collapse of a conscious being fighting to stay alive long enough to matter. "Garrett," Kira said quietly, "if I die tomorrow, if Vera kills me before I can make anyone question, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Get that data chip to someone who can use it. Earth Media, Interstellar Court, anyone with the reach to make the information public. Don't let 40 warriors die for nothing. Don't let me die for nothing." "You're not going to die," Garrett said. "Promise me anyway." He met her eyes, those violet eyes that had looked at him with pure assessment 7 nights ago, and now looked at him with something that might have been trust or might have been the desperate hope of someone who'd run out of other options. "I promise," he said. The 7th day arrived with the inevitability of execution. They came for Kira at dawn, 6 guards in ceremonial armor that suggested this was being treated as formal trial rather than simple elimination. They allowed her to wear her combat gear, allowed Garrett to accompany her as witness, allowed her to carry the data chip openly rather than confiscating it. All of which suggested Thessia was confident the trial would end with Kira dead and the evidence becoming court property. The amphitheater had been transformed. The tiered seating was packed with Valorans, thousands of them pulled from the military complex and the surrounding settlements to witness something that hadn't happened in 3 generations. A warrior challenging the court, ancient law superseding modern authority. The kind of spectacle that reminded people why Valoran culture had survived 3,000 years, while other civilizations rose and fell. In the center of the arena floor, someone had drawn the traditional combat circle in silver phosphorescent paint, that seemed to glow against the dark stone. 15 meters in diameter. Inside the circle, only 2 warriors. Outside the circle, the entire weight of Valoran tradition and 3 centuries of Genesis conditioning. Kira stood at one edge of the circle, her armor scuffed from 13 years of service, her hair pulled back in the severe braid that exposed the implant ports at the base of her skull. Small metal nodes that interfaced directly with her brainstem, feeding the neurochemical cocktail that had made her the perfect weapon until it started killing her. Across the circle, Veracross waited. She was everything the footage suggested and more. Younger than Kira by 2 Valoran years, her crimson skin showed none of the scarring that came from sustained combat. Her armor was Generation 4 specification lighter and more flexible, designed to interface with enhanced neural processing that made reaction times 40% faster than earlier generations. Her hair was violet shading to silver, cut short in a style that suggested absolute practicality over aesthetics. And her eyes held nothing, no curiosity, no anger, no recognition that she was facing another warrior who'd survived everything the Genesis program had thrown at her. Just the flat assessment of someone looking at a target that needed eliminating. Archon Thesia stood at the edge of the arena, her forearms raised in the traditional gesture of trial commencement. First warrior Kira Velthron stands accused by her own testimony of crimes against court security and unauthorized access to classified intelligence. She has invoked Reshimatok trial by combat, claiming that her actions serve higher truth than operational protocol. The court has selected Veracross as champion. Combat continues until one warrior yields, dies, or exits the circle. The victor's truth becomes binding. She lowered her arms. Begin. Vera moved immediately, closing the distance between them with the kind of speed that made human nervous systems look laughably inefficient. 3 steps and she was inside Kira's guard, her hand already rising in a strike that would have crushed Kira's throat if it landed. Kira twisted, not fast enough to avoid the blow entirely, but fast enough to take it on the shoulder instead of the neck. The impact drove her backward and she felt something crack in her clavicle, sharp pain radiating down her arm. Vera followed up with a leg sweep that would have put Kira on the ground, but Kira jumped the sweep and countered with an elbow strike that Vera blocked effortlessly. They separated, circling, and Garrett could see the problem immediately. Every movement Kira made was half a second slower than it should have been, compromised by the implant glitches that were making her nervous system fire in stuttering patterns. Every movement Vera made was textbook perfect, the absolute pinnacle of what Genesis enhancement could produce. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution with ceremonial delays. They engaged again, and this time Vera's combination was too fast for Kira to counter. Strikes to the ribs, the kidney, the solar plexus delivered with the kind of precision that suggested Vera was inflicting maximum damage while keeping Kira conscious and mobile enough to continue fighting. Making it last, making it clear. Kira went down hard, blood streaming from her nose, and Vera stood over her with blade drawn. Not the killing stroke yet, but the positioning that suggested it was coming. Yield, Vera said. Her voice carried no emotion, no triumph, just the flat delivery of someone executing a checklist. Court champion offers mercy to defeated opponent. Yield and your death will be quick. Kira looked up at her, gasping for breath around what felt like broken ribs, and did the only thing she had left. She talked. Vera, she said, her voice carrying despite the pain. How old are you? Vera's head tilted fractionally. 24 Valoran years, irrelevant to combat outcome. And how many warriors do you know who are older than 30? Irrelevant. No, Kira said, pushing herself to sitting, despite the way her body screamed protest. It's the only thing that's relevant. How many, Vera, in your entire operational career? How many warriors have you met who survived past age 30? Vera's blade didn't waver, but something shifted in her expression. A micro-hesitation that suggested the question had accessed cognitive pathways the conditioning hadn't completely suppressed. Warriors retire, Vera said. Medical complications, natural attrition. 40 warriors in 10 years, Kira said, her voice getting stronger. All between 25 and 30, all with identical symptoms, all retired quietly before anyone could ask why. I was Genesis Generation 2. You're Generation 4. In 2 years, you'll be 26. Want to know what happens at 26, Vera? Yield or die, Vera said, but the blade trembled. Just slightly. Just enough. This happens, Kira said, and let the seizure take her. She'd been holding it back for the last 3 minutes, fighting the implant with every ounce of will she possessed. But now she released that control and let Vera see exactly what Genesis obsolescence looked like. Her body convulsed, blood streaming from her nose and ears, her hands clawing at her own head, while her legs kicked in patterns that looked like running from something only she could see. The amphitheater went silent. 5,000 Valorans watching their perfect weapon experience catastrophic system failure. Watching the future that awaited every Genesis warrior who survived long enough to become inconvenient. When the seizure released her after 47 seconds, Kira looked up at Vera with bloodshot eyes and said, "That's implant rejection. That's what they designed us to experience at age 30, so we die before we accumulate enough combat experience to question orders. You're 24, Vera. You have 2 years, maybe less. And when it starts happening to you, they'll retire you just like they retired the 40 before me. Just like they're trying to retire me right now by sending you to kill me." Vera's blade lowered 6 inches. Not dropped, not sheathed, but lowered. "The court wouldn't," she said, and for the first time her voice carried something other than flat assessment. "Genesis warriors are valuable. They wouldn't design us to fail." "The data chip in my armor pocket says otherwise," Kira replied. "Engineering specifications, medical protocols, communication logs. Everything that proves planned obsolescence is a feature, not a malfunction. Kill me, and Archon Thessia gets to bury that evidence. Let me live long enough to present it, and you get to know the truth about what you are and how long you have." Vera stood frozen here, conditioning warring with something deeper, some fragment of consciousness that the Genesis program hadn't managed to completely erase. Around them, the amphitheater held its breath, waiting to see whether 3 centuries of careful engineering could withstand one warrior, asking another warrior to choose truth over obedience. "This is psychological manipulation," Vera said finally, "designed to compromise my operational effectiveness." "Yes," Kira agreed, "it absolutely is. And it's also true. Both things can exist simultaneously, Vera. That's what makes choice complicated." Vera's blade rose again, and Garrett thought the moment was lost. But instead of striking, Vera turned to face Archon Thessia, her voice carrying across the amphitheater with the kind of projection that suggested she wanted everyone to hear. "I require clarification," Vera said. "First Warrior Velthron claims Genesis program includes planned obsolescence protocols. I require confirmation or denial from Archon Thessia before proceeding with execution." The amphitheater erupted in murmurs. A Generation 4 warrior interrupting trial by combat to demand answers from the Archon. It was unprecedented, possibly illegal under traditional law, and absolutely devastating to the court's authority. Thessia's forearms folded in a configuration that suggested barely controlled fury. "Champion Cross, you are ordered to complete your assigned function. First Warrior Velthron's accusations are irrelevant under trial parameters." "Negative," Vera said, and the single word carried the weight of revelation. "If accusations are factual, then execution of First Warrior Velthron constitutes suppression of legitimate evidence regarding systematic warrior termination. Warrior's right of conscience permits refusal of unlawful orders. I require confirmation regarding planned obsolescence before proceeding." Thessia descended the steps to the arena floor, moving with dangerous grace. "Champion, you are experiencing psychological contamination. Report for immediate reconditioning." "I will report after receiving answer," Vera said. "Does Genesis program include planned obsolescence protocols targeting warriors aged 25 to 30? For a long moment, Thessia said nothing. The amphitheater waited 5,000 witnesses holding their breath, while the Archon calculated whether truth or continued deception served her interest better. Finally, she spoke. "Genesis program parameters are classified for security purposes. No warrior is authorized to access that information." "That is not answer," Vera said. "Question requires binary response. Does planned obsolescence exist or not exist? The complexities of Genesis engineering are beyond warrior comprehension." Thessia said, her voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining reality to a child. "Implant integration involves sophisticated neurochemical balancing that occasionally results in rejection. This is known. Treatment protocols exist. Warriors experiencing symptoms receive appropriate medical intervention." 40 warriors died in 10 years, Kira said from the ground. All aged 25 to 30, all with rejection symptoms. What medical intervention did they receive, Archon? What treatment did you provide before executing them? Thessia's expression hardened. Warriors experiencing terminal rejection cannot be saved. Retirement is mercy, not murder. Then you confirm, Vera said slowly, that rejection is terminal. That warriors experiencing symptoms will die. That medical intervention is unavailable or ineffective. I confirm that Genesis enhancement carries risks, Thessia said carefully. All warriors accept these risks upon enhancement. The program continues because benefits outweigh costs. Did I accept these risks? Vera asked. I was 13 when enhanced. What understanding did I possess at 13 to evaluate terminal rejection risk versus combat capability benefit? The question hung in the air like a knife waiting to fall. Around the amphitheater, warriors were standing now, hundreds of them, their expressions showing the dawning realization that Vira had just articulated something they'd never been allowed to question. Informed consent. The difference between volunteering and being volunteered. You accepted enhancement, Thessia said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Your parents consented on your behalf. Standard procedure for military recruitment. My parents died in territorial raid when I was 8, Vera said. Court records show no guardians listed at time of enhancement who provided parental consent. Thessia was silent. I invoke warrior's right of conscience, Vera said, and her voice carried the weight of ancient law. I decline to execute opponent whose accusations regarding systematic deception appear to have factual merit. First Warrior Velthron has demonstrated honor in challenging court authority, despite certain knowledge that challenge would result in lethal confrontation. I surrender this trial. Her truth stands validated. She drove her blade into the arena floor and left it standing vertical between them, like a monument to choice. The amphitheater exploded into chaos. Warriors were shouting, demanding answers, invoking their own rights to question. Court officials scrambled to respond to questions they'd spent 3 centuries avoiding. And in the center of it all, Kira pushed herself to standing with the Garrett's help, bleeding and broken, but alive, watching 300 years of carefully maintained deception collapse under the weight of one warrior asking another to choose truth. Archon Thessia raised all 4 arms, broadcasting on frequencies designed to trigger submission responses in Genesis-enhanced neurologies. The chaos subsided gradually, reluctantly, but it subsided. The court, Thessia said, her voice carrying barely controlled fury, acknowledges that Champion Cross has surrendered trial by combat. Under Reshmatok protocols, First Warrior Velthron's accusations stand as validated truth pending court response. The Archon calls emergency session to address these matters. All warriors currently experiencing rejection symptoms are ordered to report for medical evaluation. All others return to standard duties. She turned to Kira. You wanted truth, First Warrior. You will have it. Emergency session convenes in 6 hours. You will present your evidence before assembled court in military command. We will determine whether your accusations merit systematic reform or whether you have simply weaponized incomplete information to serve personal agenda of a Washington lawful retirement. 6 hours, Kira said. Agreed. The guards escorted Kira and Garrett back to quarters under what was technically protective custody, but felt like imprisonment. Vera came with them, having been placed under similar restrictions, pending psychological evaluation. The 3 of them sat in the common area surrounded by guards waiting for the emergency session that would determine whether 40 deaths became acknowledged murders or remained classified medical complications. Why did you surrender? Kira asked Vera. The younger warrior was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Because I accessed Genesis program files after seeing your seizure. I used Champion clearance to verify your claims. I found my own file, my enhancement records, and I found notation that I am currently categorized as approaching obsolescence threshold. She looked up, and her eyes held something Garrett had never seen in a Genesis warrior before. Fear. I am 24, Vera said. In my file, there is scheduled medical evaluation for 6 months from now. Projected outcome retirement recommendation due to anticipated rejection onset. They have already decided I will die at 25. They are simply waiting for symptoms to justify decision they have already made. How many others? Garrett asked. In my access to files before security lockout, I identified 83 warriors currently categorized as approaching obsolescence threshold, Vera said. Ages 23 to 29, all scheduled for evaluation within next 2 years, all with projected outcome of retirement. 83 more murders waiting to happen, Kira said, on top of the 40 already dead. This is why I surrendered, Vera said. Because if your accusations are false, court will expose that in emergency session, and I will accept appropriate punishment for violation of combat protocols. But if your accusations are true, then emergency session is only opportunity to prevent 83 additional executions. That outcome justifies violation. The 6 hours passed with agonizing slowness. Dr. Miriam Holt arrived from Earth, having been summoned by Garrett during the trial. She examined Kira's injuries, pronounced several ribs cracked and the clavicle fracture serious but manageable, and administered pain medication that Kira refused. I need to be clear for the session, Kira said. I need every cognitive function operating at maximum capacity. You need to not die from internal bleeding, Dr. Holt countered, but she respected the refusal. She also brought news from Earth. The trial had been broadcast through diplomatic channels, and within 3 hours, every major human news organization was running stories about Genesis program obsolescence. The footage of Kira's seizure had gone viral, watched by billions across Earth and its colonies. Public pressure was mounting for the Interstellar Court to intervene with human rights organizations, demanding investigation into what they were calling systematic genocide. The court can't suppress this anymore, Dr. Holt said. Even if they kill you in the emergency session, the evidence is public. You've already won the information war. But not the survival war, Kira replied. 83 warriors are still scheduled for retirement. Public knowledge doesn't save them if the court decides to accelerate their executions before external pressure forces change. When the guards came to escort them to the emergency session, Kira could barely walk. The pain medication she'd refused would have helped, but it would also have dulled the sharp clarity she needed for what came next. Garrett supported her on one side, Vera on the other, and together they made their way to the amphitheaters that had been reconfigured for formal court proceedings rather than combat. The tiered seating was packed again, but this time with military command, court officials, and representatives from every Valoran colony system. The gallery above held observers from Earth, from neutral species, from the Interstellar Court itself. This wasn't just a trial anymore. It was the moment when Valoran civilization would be forced to acknowledge what it had become. Archon Thessia sat at the high platform flanked by the 4 other members of the ruling council. Her expression was carefully neutral, but Garrett could see the tension in the way her arms were folded, the subtle signs of someone who'd lost control of a situation and was calculating how to regain it. First Warrior Kira Velthron, Thessia said, her voice formal and cold. You stand before emergency session of Valoran Ruling Council under charges of treason, unauthorized access to classified intelligence, and disruption of lawful military operations. You have claimed these actions serve higher purpose of opposing systematic deception. Present your evidence. Kira stepped forward, moving away from Garrett and Vetra's support, forcing her body to stand unsupported, despite the way broken ribs screamed with each breath. I present Genesis program engineering specifications, she said, holding up the data chip, which show that neurochemical implants are designed with planned failure mechanisms targeting warriors aged 28 to 32. I present medical records of 40 warriors who experienced rejection and were retired between ages 25 and 30. I present communication logs showing Genesis administrators discussing retirement schedules and efficiency calculations regarding warrior replacement rates. She activated the data chip and holographic displays materialized throughout the amphitheater, showing documentation that made the assembled Valorans shift uncomfortably. Engineering diagrams highlighting the failure mechanisms. Medical reports showing identical symptom progression across 40 warriors. Communications discussing warriors by designation number rather than name, calculating optimal retirement timing to maintain force readiness while minimizing public awareness. I present, Kira continued, her voice strengthening, evidence that Genesis program has systematically murdered approximately 400 warriors over 60 years of operation. Evidence that current program includes 83 warriors scheduled for retirement in next 2 years, despite absence of current symptoms. evidence that the court has maintained this system by ensuring warriors die before accumulating enough experience to question their conditioning. She paused, letting the weight of the evidence settle over the amphitheater. Then she played the final card. And I present testimony from champion Vera Cross Generation 4 warrior who accessed her own Genesis file and discovered she is currently categorized for retirement at age 25 despite perfect operational record and zero rejection symptoms. The court is not responding to medical necessity. The court is executing warriors on schedule to prevent them from becoming autonomous. The amphitheater erupted. Warriors shouting questions, demanding access to their own files, invoking every traditional right they could remember. Court officials trying to restore order, while military command watched with expressions ranging from shock to grim acknowledgement that this had always been an open secret they'd agreed not to examine too closely. Thesia let the chaos continue for exactly 2 minutes before raising her arms again. This time the silence came faster, driven by desperate need to hear how the Archon would respond to accusations that couldn't be denied or deflected anymore. The evidence, Thesia said slowly, is substantially accurate. The admission hit like a physical force. Even the warriors who'd suspected the truth looked stunned to hear it stated openly. Genesis program, Thesia continued, was designed 60 years ago to address strategic deficiency in Valoran military capability. Our population is small relative to hostile territories. Conventional warfare requires numerical superiority we do not possess. Genesis enhancement allows individual warriors to achieve combat capability equivalent to 50 conventional soldiers. This force multiplication has preserved Valoran sovereignty for 3 generations. She paused, then delivered the justification that made Garrett's blood run cold. The planned obsolescence protocols exist because enhanced warriors who survive past age 30 develop autonomous decision-making capability that makes them unreliable for command structure maintenance. They question orders, form independent loyalties, prioritize personal judgment over operational directives. History demonstrates that elite military forces eventually turn against their governments. We solve that problem by ensuring our elite forces never survive long enough to become politically dangerous. You're killing them, Kira said, to prevent them from thinking. We are maintaining operational security, Thesia corrected. And before you claim moral high ground, consider the mathematics. 400 warriors died over 60 years. But Genesis program protected territories containing 40 billion Valorans. Would you sacrifice 40 billion to save 400? Would you condemn our civilization to conquest, to preserve warriors who volunteered for enhancement? We didn't volunteer, Vera said, her voice cutting through the justifications. We were children, 13 years old. We were told enhancement was honor. We were told we would serve our people. We were not told we would die at 30. That is not informed consent. That is deception that invalidates any claimed moral justification for the program. You were children, Thesia agreed. Children cannot make strategic decisions. Adults made those decisions for you, weighing your individual lives against billions of lives you would protect. That calculus favors the billions. Then make it voluntary now, Garrett said, speaking for the first time. You've admitted the program exists. You've acknowledged the obsolescence protocols. Now offer current warriors and future recruits full disclosure. Let them choose whether protecting 40 billion Valorans is worth dying at 30. Let them make informed decisions rather than discovering the truth when they're already dying. Thesia's expression shifted towards something that might have been respect or might have been recognition of a worthy opponent. And if we offer full disclosure, Ambassador, how many warriors do you think will volunteer for enhancement knowing the cost? I don't know, Garrett admitted. But that's the point. You've been making that choice for them. Now let them make it themselves. And if insufficient warriors volunteer, if force readiness drops below strategic minimum, if territories fall because we lack military capability to defend them, then Valoran civilization adapts, Garrett said. You find different solutions. You build alliances instead of relying on force multiplication. You develop technologies that don't require sacrificing children. You do what every other civilization does when they can't achieve objectives through violence alone. You choose something different. The amphitheater was silent now. Every eye fixed on Archon Thesia, waiting to see whether 3 centuries of cultural momentum could be redirected by one human's argument that choice mattered more than survival. Finally, Thesia spoke. The court offers compromise, she said. Warriors currently experiencing rejection symptoms will be offered medical discharge with full benefits and pension. Warriors approaching obsolescence threshold will be offered choice continue service with full disclosure of life expectancy parameters or accept discharge with benefits. Future recruitment will include transparent discussion of enhancement risks and expected lifespan. No warrior will enter Genesis program without understanding complete cost. That's not compromise, Kira said, her voice cutting through the political posturing. That's permission to die slowly instead of quickly. Medical discharge doesn't solve implant rejection. It just moves the dying from military facilities to private homes, where families watch their children seize and bleed and die over months while you maintain plausible deniability about cause of death. Then what do you propose? Thesia asked, and there was genuine curiosity in her voice now. Treatment, Kira said. Human neuroscience has protocols for implant rejection. I have documentation, success rate approximately 60%. Procedure requires conscious resistance during neural pathway reconstruction. Dangerous, painful, but possible. Offer that to every warrior experiencing rejection. Offer it to the 83 scheduled for retirement. Give us a chance to survive instead of guaranteed death on your schedule. Human medicine? Thesia's skepticism was evident. You would trust alien procedures on Valoran neurology. I would trust anything that offers survival over certain execution, Kira replied. Your medicine treats rejection as terminal because keeping us alive past 30 compromises your control. Human medicine has no such investment in our deaths. That makes it more trustworthy. Thesia was silent, calculating. Then she turned to Dr. Holt, who'd been observing from the gallery. Doctor, Thesia said, can you achieve stated success rates on Valoran physiology? Dr. Holt stood, and Garrett could see the weight of responsibility settling over her. Unknown, she said bluntly. Human protocols are designed for human neurology. Valoran brain structures are similar, but not identical. Integration depth is significantly greater than any case I've treated. Honest assessment, I would estimate success rates closer to 40% given the variables. Maybe lower depending on rejection severity. But 40% is better than 0%, which is what your current protocols offer. 40%, Thesia repeated, meaning 60% die during procedure. Or they die during rejection over the next 6 months, Dr. Holt countered. The difference is agency. Dying during treatment they chose is different from being executed on schedule they didn't consent to. Archon Thesia stood, and the amphitheater fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of decisions that would reshape Valoran civilization. The court authorizes trial implementation of human medical intervention for Genesis rejection, she said. Volunteers will be accepted. Procedures will be monitored and documented. If success rates match projected parameters, broader implementation will be considered. If success rates fall below 30%, program will be terminated and alternative solutions pursued. She paused, then looked directly at Kira. First Warrior Velthron has demonstrated extraordinary courage in challenging court authority, despite certain knowledge of consequences. In recognition of this service to warrior welfare, the court offers her first access to experimental treatment. She may accept or decline. Choice is hers. The amphitheater waited. 5,000 warriors watching Kira face the decision that would determine whether her accusations led to actual change or simply to different deaths. Kira didn't hesitate. I volunteer, she said, and I request procedure be broadcast publicly so every warrior can see exact cost and exact outcome. No more deception, no more hidden deaths. If I survive, they see what survival requires. If I die, they see what choice costs. Either way, they make informed decisions. Agreed, Thesia said. Procedure will commence in 72 hours. Public broadcast will be arranged. First Warrior Velthron has earned the right to or survive on her own terms. The 72 hours felt like drowning in slow motion. Kira's seizures increased to every 4 hours, each one lasting longer, requiring more conscious effort to suppress. Garrett watched her fight her own neurology with the same determination she'd brought to the trial and understood that she was burning through reserves faster than her body could replenish them. Dr. Holt arrived with her full medical team 36 hours before the procedure, transforming a section of the complex into a surgical theater equipped with Earth technology and Valoran monitoring systems. She examined Kira for 6 hours, running scans that mapped neural pathways and implant integration in three-dimensional holographic detail that made Garrett's stomach turn. The implants looked like metallic parasites wrapped around Kira's brain stem tendrils, extending into structures that controlled everything from basic motor function to complex decision-making. Removing them would be instantly fatal. Isolating them while they actively fought to maintain control would require Kira to consciously resist neurological commands for 8 hours straight. Dr. Holt delivered her assessment with clinical precision that somehow made it worse. "Integration depth exceeds any case I've treated," she said, displaying scans that showed metal and biology merged at the molecular level. "Standard human protocols require patient resistance for 4 to 6 hours. Your case will require minimum 8 hours, possibly longer, if the implant proves particularly resistant to isolation. Every minute past 8 hours decreases survival probability by approximately 3%. "What are my actual odds?" Kira asked. Dr. Holt was quiet for a moment, and Garrett could see her calculating whether honesty served better than optimism. She chose honesty. 35%, Dr. Holt said. "Maybe 40 if you have exceptional pain tolerance and mental discipline. The procedure requires you to consciously fight implant commands while remaining completely still during delicate neural reconstruction. Most patients lose that fight around hour 5. You'll need to maintain it for 8 minimum." "And if I lose the fight," Kira asked. "You attack the surgical team," Dr. Holt said bluntly. "Implant interprets our work as hostile action and floods your system with kill commands. If you can't suppress those commands, you'll try to eliminate perceived threats. We'll have restraints, but restraints designed for human strength. You're significantly stronger. If you break free during a critical phase of reconstruction, you could suffer catastrophic brain damage or death, and you might kill members of my team in the process." "Then don't let me break free," Kira said. "We'll do our best," Dr. Holt replied, "but understand that our best might not be sufficient. I want you to have realistic expectations. This procedure has never been attempted on Valoran neurology. You're volunteering to be the first. That makes you either incredibly brave or suffering from impaired judgment due to rejection-induced cognitive decline." "Or both," Kira said. "Can we begin earlier than 72 hours? The seizures are accelerating. I don't know if I'll be conscious enough in 3 days to maintain resistance." Dr. Holt checked her equipment logs, consulted with her team, then shook her head. "We need the full 72 hours to prepare. The neural mapping requires time to analyze. The reconstruction pathways need to be planned with extreme precision. If we rush this, your odds drop to single digits. You need to survive the next 3 days." "I'll survive," Kira said, though her voice carried uncertainty that hadn't been there before. The second night, Vera requested permission to speak with Kira privately. The guards allowed it, positioning themselves outside the common area but maintaining visual surveillance. The two warriors sat across from each other, Generation 2 facing Generation 4, separated by everything the Genesis program had refined between their respective enhancements. "I accessed complete Genesis archives before security lockdown," Vera said without preamble. "I found data regarding all warriors enhanced over 60 years. Total number 473. Current active 208. Retired for medical reasons 247. Remaining 18 died in combat operations." She paused, letting the mathematics speak. More than half of all Genesis warriors had been retired for medical reasons. More than half had experienced the same planned obsolescence. "I also found," Vera continued, "that average service duration before retirement is 11 years. You have served 13 years. You are statistical anomaly first warrior. Your rejection should have manifested at year 11. You survived 2 additional years beyond design parameters." "Lucky me," Kira said, but there was no humor in it. "Not luck," Vera replied. "Resistance. Your file contains notation from multiple reconditioning sessions describing you as difficult to maintain, requiring higher neurochemical intervention to suppress autonomous decision-making. The same resistance that made reconditioning difficult made rejection slower. You survived longer because you were fighting the conditioning from the beginning." I don't remember fighting, Kira said. I remember 13 years of perfect obedience, 315 kills without hesitation. Conscious mind does not remember, Vera said, but neural patterns show resistance, documented across multiple reconditioning sessions. You were always fighting First Warrior. You simply didn't know it until human diplomats showed you that fighting was possible. Kira absorbed this, and Garrett could see the way it shifted something in her expression. The possibility that her survival wasn't just biological variance, but evidence of consciousness that had never fully surrendered to the conditioning. Why are you telling me this? Kira asked. Because I am 24, Vera said. In approximately 6 months, my rejection will begin. If you survive procedure, I will request to be second volunteer. If you do not survive, I will request medical discharge and attempt to find alternative treatment before symptoms become terminal. Either way, your outcome determines my path. I want you to understand that your resistance is not weakness. It is why you survived long enough to challenge the court. It is why I am sitting here instead of in reconditioning. Your resistance matters. The night before the procedure, Kira asked Garrett to help her record a message. In case I don't survive, she explained, setting up a recording device in her quarters. There are things that should be said for the warriors who come after, for the families of the 40 who died without knowing why, for anyone who needs to understand what this cost. Garrett helped her configure the equipment, then stepped back to let her speak. Kira sat in front of the recording device, and for a long moment she was silent, gathering words for something she'd never been trained to express. Then she began. My name is Kira Velthron, First Warrior Genesis Program Generation 2. I am 26 Valoran years old, approximately 180 human years. I have served Valoran military for 13 years. I have killed 315 beings in service of what I was told was necessary for our civilization's survival. I was 13 when they enhanced me. I don't remember my birth name. I don't remember my parents. The Genesis program removed those memories during conditioning, replacing them with operational directives and combat protocols. For 13 years, I believed this was my purpose, that I was built for violence, that killing was my nature, that serving without question was the highest expression of warrior honor. I was wrong. The Genesis program didn't build me for violence. It broke me for obedience. It took a child who might have chosen to serve and created a weapon that couldn't choose anything. And when that weapon started developing, autonomous thought, started questioning, started becoming dangerous to the authority that created it, the program was designed to kill me before I could realize what had been done. 40 warriors died before me. 40 warriors who experienced the same rejection, who suffered the same seizures, who died believing their bodies had failed them, rather than understanding their bodies were executing predetermined termination protocols. They died without knowing the truth. They died without choice. I am attempting to survive with choice. In 8 hours, I will undergo experimental surgery that has approximately 35% chance of success. If I survive, I will have proven that Genesis warriors can be saved, that we can exist beyond the expiration date designed into our neurologies. If I die, I will have proven that choice matters even when the outcome is death. To the warriors watching this, you are not weapons. You are conscious beings who were told you were weapons. The difference matters. Choice exists. Resistance is possible. Question everything they taught you. Fight for your right to survive. And if you choose to volunteer for enhancement, even knowing the cost, make that choice with full understanding rather than childhood innocence. To the families of the 40, your children died serving a lie. They believed they were protecting you. They died before discovering they were protecting a system that saw them as expendable resources with planned replacement schedules. I am sorry I cannot give you anything more than truth, but truth is all I have to offer. To anyone who believes Genesis program was justified by strategic necessity, 40 billion lives protected by 400 deaths sounds like acceptable mathematics until you are one of the 400. Until you watch your own neurology execute termination protocols and realize that everything you believed about your purpose was a comfortable fiction maintained by people who never risked becoming obsolete themselves. My name is Kira Velthron. I am choosing to fight for my right to exist beyond my designed expiration date. I am choosing to trust that consciousness matters more than obedience. I am choosing to believe that warriors can be more than weapons if we're given the chance to become more. If you're watching this after my death, know that I died trying. If you're watching this after my survival, know that trying was worth it. This is my choice. Make yours." She stopped the recording and sat in silence for a moment. Then she looked at Garrett. "If I don't survive," she said, "Mom, make sure this gets distributed. Make sure every warrior sees it. Make sure they know that choice existed, even if I couldn't execute it successfully." "You're going to survive," Garrett said, though his conviction was wearing thin under the weight of 35% odds. "Maybe," Kira said, "but I need you to promise anyway." "I promise." The procedure began at dawn. They'd converted the amphitheater into a surgical theater with Dr. Holt's equipment positioned at the center and observation seating arranged in tiers above. 5,000 warriors filled the seats, watching holographic displays that would show Kira's neural activity in real time. Earth observers monitored via remote feed in the Interstellar Court had assigned neutral physicians to verify the legitimacy of the procedure. Kira lay on the surgical platform, fully conscious, her head locked in a stabilization frame that prevented movement. Neural monitors covered her skull in a crown of sensors tracking every electrical impulse. Intravenous lines ran medications that would keep her conscious despite the pain, while preventing her body from going into shock. Restraints bound her wrists, ankles, torso. They looked substantial, but Garrett knew they were designed for human strength. If Kira's full combat capability activated, they wouldn't hold. "Last chance to reconsider," Dr. Holt said, positioning the first neural probe. "No reconsideration," Kira replied, her voice steady. "Begin procedure." The first incision was precise, opening access to implant ports at the base of her skull. Kira's hands clenched against the restraints, but she didn't cry out. The monitor showed her neural activity spiking as the implant registered the intrusion and began flooding her system with defensive responses. Hour 1 was assessment. Dr. Holt mapped the exact pathways where implant and brain had merged, identifying which connections could be severed and which required careful reconstruction. Kira remained conscious throughout, her eyes tracking the displays, watching her own brain light up in patterns that showed the implant fighting to maintain control. Hour 2 was when it became difficult. Dr. Holt began the actual reconstruction using microscopic neural graphs to build new pathways around the implant rather than through it. Each new connection triggered the implant's defense protocols, flooding Kira with neurochemical commands to stop the procedure, to attack the medical team, to execute the prime directives that had been burned into her neurology. "Talk to me," Dr. Holt said, her voice calm despite the delicate work she was performing. "Tell me about Earth. Tell me about anything that keeps you focused on staying human." Kira's voice came out hoarse, forced through clenched teeth. "Rain in Seattle. So fine it's like the air is crying. Garrett told me humans dream. That consciousness goes somewhere when you sleep." Hour 3, hour 4. The procedure continued with brutal precision, each new neural pathway constructed, while Kira described things she'd never experienced. Thunderstorms, ocean waves, gardens where tomatoes grew heavy enough to bend vines. Hour 5 was when she started breaking. The monitors showed her resistance wavering, the implant gaining ground, conscious control, slipping toward the engineered violence that had defined her for 13 years. Her hands jerked against the restraints and her eyes lost focus, tracking threats only she could see. "Kira," Garrett said, his voice broadcast into the surgical theater. 4 seconds. You held back for 4 seconds the first night we met. You've held back for 2 months since then. You can hold back for 3 more hours." Her eyes found his across the amphitheater, and something in her expression suggested she was using him as an anchor, a fixed point in the neurological storm trying to drown her. 4 seconds, she whispered. Then 2 months. Then 3 more hours. The mathematics helps. Hour 6, the restraints creaked under strain as Kira's body convulsed, muscles responding to combat, while commands her conscious mind was barely suppressing. Dr. Holt's hands moved with the mechanical precision, constructing pathways, while blood streamed from Kira's nose and ears. Hour 7 brought the crisis point. Kira's left restraint cracked the metal, groaning under forces it wasn't designed to withstand. Dr. Holt immediately called for additional restraints, but installing them required pausing the procedure. "No," Kira gasped. "Don't stop. I can hold. Don't stop." "If that restraint fails during a critical reconstruction phase, you could suffer catastrophic damage," Dr. Holt said. "I can hold," Kira repeated. Trust me. Please. Dr. Holt looked at her patient at the neural displays showing consciousness and implant locked in war for dominance and made a decision that would have violated every Earth medical protocol. Continue, she told her team, but be ready to abort if the restraint fails completely. Hour 8 arrived like a finish line that kept receding. Dr. Holt made the final connections, sealed the incisions, and stepped back from the platform with hands that trembled from sustained precision work. Procedure complete, she said. Neural pathways reconstructed. Implant isolated from core brain functions. Now we wait to see if the reconstruction holds. Kira lay on the platform conscious, but barely her eyes tracking the ceiling, like she was seeing through it to something beyond. The monitors showed her neural activity settling into new patterns, pathways lighting up that hadn't existed 8 hours ago. Old connections going dark as the implant lost its grip on her brain stem. The amphitheater was absolutely silent. 5,000 warriors watching one of their own survive something they'd been told was unsurvivable. Kira, Garrett said quietly, can you hear me? Yes, she whispered. I hear you. I hear everything. It's different, quieter. The commands are still there, but they're distant, like someone shouting from far away instead of screaming inside my head. That's the new pathways, Dr. Holt explained. Your brain is learning to route around the implant. It will take weeks for the reconstruction to fully stabilize, but if you've survived this long, your odds of complete recovery are above 90%. The amphitheater erupted in sound that felt like the foundations of the world shifting. Warriors cheering, calling out questions, demanding the procedure for themselves. In the stands, Garrett saw Vera, her expression showing something that might have been hope, or might have been the desperate calculation of someone trying to decide whether surgical risk was worth survival. Archon Thesia stood at the edge of the arena, her forearms folded in a configuration that suggested she was witnessing the end of an era. When she spoke, her voice carried through the amphitheater's audio system. The court recognizes the viability of human medical intervention for implant rejection, she said. Warriors experiencing rejection symptoms will be offered the procedure with full informed consent regarding risks and success rates. Voluntary participation, no penalties for declining treatment. She paused, then added something that felt like genuine concession rather than political maneuvering. And Genesis program recruitment protocols will be revised to include transparent disclosure of life expectancy, parameters, implant rejection risks, and availability of medical intervention. No more children will enter enhancement without understanding the full cost. It wasn't revolution. It wasn't the complete dismantling Kira might have wanted, but it was change, real change forced by one warrior who'd refused to die on schedule. The recovery took 6 weeks. Kira spent the first week unconscious, her brain reconstructing itself around the isolated implant. The second week brought consciousness, but not mobility. Her motor control scrambled by the neural rewiring. Third and fourth weeks were physical therapy, relearning how to walk without the implant's enhancement protocols, how to make decisions without neurochemical commands guiding every choice. By week 6, she could stand unassisted, could walk the corridors of the medical facility without trembling, could look at Garrett without the implant screaming at her to assess threat levels and execute responses. She looked different. The severe braid had given way to loose hair that softened the aggressive geometry of her face. The constant tension in her shoulders had eased. Her eyes held something that might have been peace or might have been exhaustion, so profound it resembled peace. During the 6 weeks of Kira's recovery, the Genesis program's response to the new protocols revealed itself in numbers that made Garrett's chest tight. 173 warriors volunteered for the procedure. Dr. Holt's team, augmented by Valoran medical personnel who'd been trained in the new techniques, worked in rotating shifts to accommodate the demand. Success rates held steady at 42%, slightly higher than initial projections, but still devastating in absolute terms. 101 warriors died during surgery. 72 warriors survived. The Valoran military created a memorial wall in the amphitheater, engraving the names of all who died, those executed under the old system, and those lost during treatment under the new. The wall stretched 20 meters, carved from black stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. 247 names from the previous 60 years. 101 names from the 6 weeks of surgical intervention. 348 warriors who died because they were enhanced as children and never told the cost. Kira attended every funeral for the 101. She stood beside families who'd lost daughters, sons, siblings to a procedure that offered hope but delivered death. She spoke at services, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd survived when others hadn't. They chose, she would say at each funeral, variations on the same theme. They were given truth and they chose to fight for survival rather than accept guaranteed death. That choice makes them warriors in ways Genesis conditioning never achieved. They deserve honor. They deserve memory. They deserve acknowledgement that their deaths mattered. Vera survived her procedure in week 4. She was younger, her implant integration less severe, and she came through the 8 hours with relatively minor complications. When she woke, the first thing she asked was how many others had made it. 63 so far, Kira told her. 38 didn't survive. Vera absorbed this in silence, then said, 63 is more than 0. 38 chose their deaths instead of having them chosen for them. That matters. On the final day of Kira's medical clearance, Dr. Holt delivered the assessment that would determine her future. Neurologically, you're stable, Dr. Holt said, reviewing scans that showed the isolated implants surrounded by healthy neural tissue. The reconstruction has held. You'll experience occasional tremors probably for the rest of your life, and your reaction time will never match what it was with active enhancement. But you're alive, you're conscious, and you're capable of making autonomous decisions without neurochemical interference. So I'm cleared for duty, Kira asked. Cleared for whatever you choose, Dr. Holt corrected. That's the point. You're not a Genesis warrior anymore. You're a Valoran citizen who underwent military enhancement and survived its removal. What you do next is entirely your decision. Kira met with Garrett that evening in the observation deck overlooking the Nevada desert. The 3 moons were rising in sequence, painting the rust-colored dunes in shades of silver and blue. Doctor Holt says I can leave a medical supervision next week, Kira told him. Return to duty if I choose. Voluntary discharge if I prefer. For the first time in 13 years, I get to decide what I do instead of being told. What will you choose? Garrett asked. Kira was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the desert where this had all begun. Not return to duty, not the way it was, but maybe something else. Vyra and I have been talking. 101 warriors died during the procedure. 72 survived. Those 101 deserve to be remembered. And the 72 survivors deserve someone who understands what they're experiencing. What are you proposing? An academy, Kira said. Training facility for warriors who've undergone the procedure. Teaching them how to be effective without being controlled. How to make autonomous tactical decisions. How to integrate back into society as conscious beings instead of weapons. Vera and I would run it. Teach the things Genesis program spent 13 years trying to suppress. That sounds revolutionary, Garrett observed. It is, Kira agreed, but quiet revolution, building something better instead of burning down what exists, proving that warriors can be trusted with autonomy instead of just demanding that trust. Where would you build this academy? Here, Kira said. Nevada, neutral territory, close enough to Valoran influence that we maintain cultural connection, far enough from court oversight that we can teach without interference. Earth and Valoran cooperation instead of dominance hierarchies. She turned to look at him and her expression held a question she hadn't quite asked. I'd need a cultural advisor, someone who understands both human and Valoran perspectives, someone who knows how to navigate between species without losing himself. That sounds like a job offer, Garrett said. It is, Kira confirmed. What do you say, Ambassador, want to help build something that's never existed before? Garrett thought about the wager that had brought him here. 14% survival odds. One night that became 7 nights, that became 4 months of watching Kira choose to be something her entire biology insisted was impossible. Yes, he said, I think I do. 3 weeks later, Garrett stood with Kira in front of a small gathering in the medical facility's chapel. Dr. Holt officiated reading from texts that blended Valoran tradition with human ceremony. Vera stood as witness along with 3 other warriors who'd survived the procedure. The ceremony was brief. Kira wore simple robes rather than armor. Garrett wore formal diplomatic attire. They spoke vows that neither culture had quite prepared them for promising partnership and choice, and the commitment to keep choosing each other even when biology and culture suggested they shouldn't. When Dr. Holt pronounced them married under the laws of Earth and by the traditions of Valoran, Kira kissed Garrett with the careful intensity of someone who'd learned that gentleness was a choice she could make. I don't know how to be married, Kira said quietly, her forehead resting against his. Genesis never taught me that. Then we'll learn together, Garrett replied. The Velthron Warrior Academy opened 4 months after Kira's procedure. The facility was built into the Nevada foothills, constructed from a combination of Valoran stone carving techniques and earth architectural principles. 200 students in the first class, all warriors who'd survived the procedure and wanted to learn how to be something more than the Genesis program had designed them to be. The curriculum was unlike anything either species had attempted. Combat training that emphasized disable over destroy. Ethical frameworks for autonomous decision-making. Cultural integration studies. The neuroscience of living with isolated implants. And prominently featured throughout every course the history of the Genesis program, the names of the 348 warriors who died, and the principle that had emerged from their deaths. Strength serves choice. Kira taught the core combat courses, demonstrating techniques that didn't rely on implant enhancement. Vira taught tactical analysis, showing students how to make strategic decisions without neurochemical guidance. Garrett taught cultural perspectives, helping Valoran warriors understand the species they might encounter and the diplomatic alternatives to violence. And on the wall beside the academy entrance, 348 names were engraved in stone, a memorial and a reminder, a promise that these deaths would matter because they'd forced change that prevented future deaths. Kira stood beside that wall on the academy's opening day, tracing names she'd memorized during funerals she'd attended. Garrett stood beside her, not leading, not following, simply present in a partnership they'd chosen and kept choosing. They bet I couldn't last one night with you, Garrett said quietly. And here we are, Kira replied. 4 months later, still standing. Still building, Garrett corrected. Behind them, students were arriving. Warriors who'd survived impossible odds, who'd chosen surgical risk over certain death, who'd lost friends to the procedure, but gained the autonomy to decide their own futures. They walked past the memorial wall, seeing the names of those who hadn't survived, understanding that freedom had costs, but the costs were worth paying. The first lesson began at dawn. Kira stood before 200 students, many still showing tremors from recent neural reconstruction, all carrying the weight of having survived when others hadn't. Welcome to Velthron Academy, she said. You are here because you chose to survive. You chose to fight for autonomy when obedience would have been easier. You chose to risk death during surgery rather than accept guaranteed death from rejection. Those choices make you warriors in ways Genesis conditioning never achieved. She paused, letting her eyes sweep across the assembled students. This academy exists to honor those choices and to teach you what comes after survival. How to be strong without being controlled. How to make decisions without neurochemical commands. How to exist as conscious beings who happen to be deadly rather than weapons who happen to be conscious. The difference matters. It's the difference between serving because you choose to serve and serving because you were programmed to serve. It's the difference between protecting others because you value their lives and protecting others because you were told their lives had strategic value. It's the difference between being a warrior and being a weapon. She gestured to the memorial wall visible through the academy's entrance. 348 warriors died to create this choice. 40 died under the old system, never knowing why they were being killed. 308 died in the attempt to survive. Every single one of them matters. Every single one of them will be remembered, and every single one of them made it possible for you to stand here and choose what you become. Kira's voice strengthened, carrying across the assembled students. Genesis program taught you that strength meant dominance, that warriors existed to destroy, that obedience was the highest virtue and questioning was weakness. Everything they taught you was designed to make you useful weapons. We're here to teach you something different. Strength serves choice. Warriors protect others' autonomy, not destroy it. Questioning is how consciousness proves it exists. And usefulness is determined by you, not by whoever programmed you. Welcome to the first day of becoming something Genesis program never imagined you could be. Welcome to becoming warriors who choose. The students began their training, learning to fight without implant enhancement, learning to make decisions without neurochemical guidance, learning to exist as beings who'd been designed to be weapons but had chosen to become something more. In the Nevada foothills under three moons, rising in sequence, the Velthron Academy became proof that consciousness could survive conditioning, that choice could overcome programming, and that warriors could be more than what they'd been designed to be if someone showed them that more was possible. Kira stood on the Academy's observation deck that evening, watching students practice in the training yards below. Garrett found her there, brought her a cup of the earth tea she'd developed a taste for during recovery. Thinking about the 101, he asked. Always, Kira said. They should be here. They should have survived to see this. They made this possible, Garrett replied. Every student down there exists because those 101 proved that choosing death during treatment was better than accepting guaranteed death from rejection. Their choices created the foundation you're building on. Kira was quiet, sipping the tea, watching warriors who'd been designed to destroy learning instead to protect. I was told I couldn't last one night, she said finally. That you'd break me or I'd kill you, and either way the wager would prove human weakness and Valorant's superiority. And instead, Garrett prompted, instead, you showed me that choice existed, that consciousness mattered, that I could be something other than what I'd been programmed to be. And that choice led here, to an academy teaching other warriors the same lesson, to a memorial honoring deaths that force systematic change, to a future where Genesis warriors are offered truth instead of deception. She turned to face him, and her eyes held depths that had nothing to do with Genesis enhancement and everything to do with choices she'd made and kept making. They bet I couldn't survive one night, but we've survived long enough to change everything they built their civilization on. That's better than survival. That's victory. Below them in the training yards, warriors practiced. Above them, three moons completed their rise, painting the desert in silver light. And beside them, 348 names waited on the memorial wall, evidence that some things were worth dying for because they made it possible for others to live differently. The wager had been about survival, but what they'd built was about something more fundamental than survival. It was about proving that consciousness could choose its own path, that programming could be transcended, and that the question, what are you, mattered less than the question, what will you choose to become? Kira had chosen to become a teacher. Garrett had chosen to become her partner. And together they'd chosen to build something that honored the dead by ensuring the living had choices the dead never received. In the Nevada desert, where a diplomat had once walked into certain death and a warrior had once been designed to deliver it, an academy stood teaching that strength without choice was slavery, and choice without strength was fantasy. They taught both, and that made all the difference.